Hi, and welcome to 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Sylvia.
And I'm Vivian. Welcome back.
So, our topic today is going to be screen use in the school age child, elementary school age child, and our stories and reviewing the recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Okay, sounds good. Let's do it.
Welcome to the 10 Kids, 2 Docs podcast. Seasoned pediatricians and longtime friends, Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin have counseled thousands of parents and are raising 4 and 6 kids, respectively. Join these doctor moms as they incorporate fun and their combined wisdom and experience to share parenting insights for anyone looking for practical and trustworthy guidance. Please note that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
Today, I think we should flip our format. Let's start off by reviewing the AAP guidelines and the guidance that they give us as pediatricians to talk about screen use in this age group. And then we can use that as a launching point to discuss what we did in our homes and how we implemented this.
That sounds great. One of the things that makes screens a really difficult topic for parenting is that it's rapidly evolving. A lot of parenting is based on a generational type of parenting advice, and the screens throw that completely out of the window because basically parents with screens today are dealing with something that no other parent group has dealt with before.
Absolutely. One of the difficulties in parenting is that in all things in parenting, we all want rules. We wish there was a do this, do that, don't do this, educate your child this way, put these rules in place. And then bam, you have a well-adjusted functioning adult. And unfortunately, as I see my patients, as I see my peers' children growing up, I am forced to reconcile that there is no right formula on how to do this. And one thing that worked for one child didn't work for another child. And sometimes that's even true within the same family. And that's really frustrating and scary to look at as a parent. So we're going to try to tackle this topic. It's going to be dicey. But let's start with the things that the Academy of Pediatrics gives us. And the first thing I want to introduce is the Family Media Plan. And this is at healthychildren.org. It's a website to create your own family media plan. And what I like about it is that it allows you to put in each family member's name and their age, and then to check what are your priorities in their particular media plan. So that could be how much time they're spending on media. It could be creating screen-free zones in your house and creating screen-free times in your house. So just something kind of cool to look at. What else do we have out there, Sylvia?
Sure. In thinking about this family and media plan, where we individualize our plan for both parents and children because it involves every member of the family, the AP has come up with some ways of thinking about each individual, and they come up with what they call the 5 C's of media use. And I'm just going to review those 5 C's really quick. For the child, who is your child? How do they react to media? And what is their motivation for using it? Secondly is content. What content is worth their attention? Number 3 is calm. How does your child calm down their emotions? Sometimes media use is a mental break for kids and how we see media use for our child. The 4th C is crowding out. What does media get in the way of as far as other things that they could be doing in life besides using screens? And lastly is communication. Continued communication between parents and children about the media they're consuming. There's a lot of ways that media can spark communication between parent and child. And the American Academy of Pediatrics also refers to another site called Common Sense Media for guidelines on screen use and mainly content in the elementary aged kid.
Yeah, and actually, I will quickly look at Common Sense Media and we'll discuss that. And funny enough, Common Sense Media also has C's that they recommend for when you're thinking about media use in your child. So we have a lot of alliteration going on. So this is more particularly looking at the content of how they're engaging with media, what they're engaging with. And they recommend thinking about connection. Are the kids connecting on a personal level with what they're watching? As in, are they getting the storyline? Does the storyline have meaning to them? Critical thinking. Are they watching something that is causing them to think more logically or critically about the world around them? Creativity. Is this something that is exposing them to some new type of of art or other content that is spurring the child on to more creativity. And then context. As they're watching the content that they're seeing, is this something that the child is able to talk about with you or with their siblings or with peers in a greater context for how the programming and the content of what they just took in relates to the world around them. So these are all like C's of theoretically thinking about how we're choosing content for our school age children.
Yeah. Um, there's a lot of C's involved in the AAP guidelines here, right?
Yeah. And honestly, Sylvia, even as a pediatrician, we just reviewed these guidelines and I am kind of like, blah, blah, blah. It's so
Yeah,
theoretical. I mean, we just went through 9 C's of how to
right.
choose media and screens for this age of child. And it can feel so
Yeah,
theoretical. And, here I am. I have these 6 kids at home. They're all at different ages. We have screens all over our house. They're using tablets at school. What in the world do I do as a parent? How do we possibly put this in place? How do we do that? So I
yeah.
feel like what's much more helpful in this episode is for you and I to just talk about our personal hacks and how we did this. Like how did we implement any of this in our home?
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's tackle this topic. Let's see what we did as parents.
When we think about screens in school age, I really think there's two different things here. One is the amount of time that they're on screens, and one is the content that they're viewing on the screens. In this episode, what I'd like to focus on is content. How are we going to control content? Let's focus on what we did at home to control the content that our school age children were watching.
Yeah. And today's day and age, this is so much easier said than done. In
Oh,
our
yes.
household, one way that we decided to limit content was to just not have it around. We did not have a streaming service.
Love
Our
it.
children didn't really have individual tablets or devices. That is how we decided to limit the content that they were individually consuming.
What I love about this is that I think as a parent, when you want to restrict something, by far the easiest way to do it is to just not have it, right?
Yeah.
If it's not there, they don't ask for it. Totally agree
Right.
with that method.
Right. Why don't you tell us about your household? How did you guys regulate or decide on the content in which your children were viewing in their elementary school age years?
I was able to restrict quite a bit in my older kids. At some point, those kids are older, so we have more media in our home. So the younger kids are getting exposed. And now that principle of just not having it isn't working because they know
Yeah.
it's there. So they're asking, and it becomes a really difficult thing to mitigate.
Yeah.
And also, I've mentioned this before, screens were used for survival. The screen use at school age is all about me as the parent and what I need. It was not about the kids, right? So
Yeah.
then the question became, I want to be able to send my school age children off and say, hey, I have to do this right now, or I'm going to take a nap, go watch TV, right? How
Right.
do I do that and control the content?
Yeah.
I feel like a perfect use case scenario for me is as soon as my children were all past that toddler age, I mean, maybe even as young as 4, but certainly 5. One of my favorite things in that season of parenting was getting to a point where if we hit that Saturday morning where we had nothing to wake up for, was to stay in bed, to
Mm.
sleep in. So then the question is, again, how do I do that and control the content?
I mean, I think there's certain levels, right? The
Yes.
first level is, are they consuming age inappropriate material?
Right,
Right.
right, right, right.
Right.
That
Like,
we
so,
can, yes.
right. And a lot of times, the YouTube Kids or the restrictions on Netflix, that'll kind of, for the most part, limit age inappropriate material. And then the second tier of content is, even though it's age appropriate, what are they consuming? Like, is it junk? Is it,
Mm,
learning material?
right.
Is it, interactive, or is it just mind numbing?
If you want to have a microscope put on your parenting, a great way to do that is to have teenagers in your home who are analyzing what you're doing with your younger children. And
Hmm.
all of the time they would say to me, why are you letting them watch that brain rot? Because if we had a TV that was logged into a streaming service, even though it was on the kid's account, and I would send them to go watch it with the remote, the stuff that they would pick is it's just junk. When I look
Yes.
at the common sense list, like there's no critical thinking, there's no creativity. There's often not even a nice rise and falling plot. I mean,
Right.
there's no moral, there's nothing that we're getting out of this. And Eric and I have gone through multiple rounds of trying to hack a solution to that specific question. But one of our hacks was instilling that old school DVD player and a stack of DVDs, and then they could select a show. And
Yeah.
I, as a parent of 6, I didn't have time to constantly be monitoring what they were picking.
This sounds like a brilliant system that both gives you free time while also ensuring good content viewing for your kids.
I want an
Yeah.
option where I am pre-populating what I want my kids to watch. I can do that with a DVD player, as old school as it is. I can try to do it on YouTube TV, although that's not perfect. The other hack is I could do it on a tablet, but this is what it requires. I have to pre-download what I want them to watch. It has to be downloaded on the tablet. I have to take my tablet off the Wi-Fi or put it on
Mhm.
airplane mode. I have to make sure it doesn't remember the Wi-Fi, because a
Right.
5-year-old will figure out how to go to settings and re-enable the Wi-Fi. And if it's remembering the Wi-Fi, it just hops on. I need to make sure that the password's being required every time. And then I need to make sure what else is downloaded on that tablet, because if I have a nature documentary on there, they might be really enthralled with that until they discover that there's some type of like game that somebody downloaded on the tablet. And then they're just going to sit there and do this like
Right.
mindless game, right? Like they're
Right.
always going to gravitate. Not all kids. I do have
Right.
children who would choose the calmer, more educational, would follow
Yeah.
the rules to a T if I set out the rules. But not all of my children are like that, and I think
Yeah.
the majority of parents feel that their kids aren't just gonna do that naturally.
I love that tablet hack. It definitely is the modern day of limiting with your DVDs, like content that's downloaded onto a device, and that's the only thing that you can view. It's not something that you have to constantly police. So, do you have any other stories about what you did with your kids?
I will say with both television and video games, I am very conscious of how stimulating it is. And an example I give is I was stopped at a stoplight behind a minivan that had the pull down screen, clearly car seats in that car with some type of children's animated viewing. And I was just counting the scene changes, and it was every three
Mm,
seconds, boom,
mm,
boom, boom. And I think of this as similar to scrolling on social media. It's like that quick dopamine hit, scene change, scene change, scene change, scene change. So I find myself when I'm thinking about what kind of content I'm going to feed to my school age children, I really want to slow that down. And
yeah,
it's really funny if you're paying attention, you start to notice the pace of different types of programming, and that there are some shows out there that have really wonderful plot and storylines that have a much slower pace of scene changes. And if your child only has access to that, they will love it. But as
yeah,
soon as they have access to the more faster paced, like dopamine hit kind of programming, that's what they're going to gravitate to. And
mhm,
I think of video games in very much the same way. And I've mentioned before, I have children with ADHD. I was very cautious with them with what age I started allowing them playing video games and how stimulating those video games were, as in
mhm,
how prone to that addictive aspect of the video games they could be. And
yeah,
so when they were allowed to earn or get video game time, I also ran video games through that rubric.
right.
I want it to be slow paced. Minecraft, it's pretty nice and slow paced, things like that, right?
No, this makes perfect sense. And kind of knowing your child and knowing you want to limit overstimulating material for one versus it doesn't really affect another. This individual understanding of each child fits into the AAP model of the family media plan.
Now, the content when the parent is involved, there's some great content on YouTube. And my school age children have a whole list of YouTube people that they like to watch with my husband, like Smarter Every Day or Mark
Yeah.
Rober, these
Mark
like
Rober,
great
yeah.
engineering YouTube shorts. And they watch those with my husband, and it's a family thing of, hey, a new
Right.
one was released, let's watch it. And I think that's a great use of YouTube. But that
Mhm.
requires parent involvement. I
Yeah.
couldn't just hand them the tablet and be like, "Here, go search YouTube."
Why don't we then move on to some of the problem at
Sure,
home?
for limiting content, yeah.
Right, yeah. So for me, the biggest problem with the very restrictive model in our household is that my kids were not very very good at self-control, when they
Yeah.
actually had access to it. So I think this is part of the downfall. And one of my kids, when he was in 2nd grade, went to a sleepover party, and I remember him coming back from the sleepover, and he was just acting very strangely, kind of like fell asleep sitting up, just kind of like, "What really went on at this party? Like, what time did you go to sleep?" And through, questioning, it turns out that he actually did not sleep at all at the sleepover party because, his friend had a handheld gaming device, and he, had never had access to something like that before,
Right.
given
Right.
my restrictions that I outlined earlier, and he stayed up all night long playing a game on that device, and I was like, "I can't believe you have absolutely no self-control to
Yes,
put
yes.
this down." And honestly, I was
Yeah,
like, for a parent at that time, I was very disappointed, and I
yeah.
had those thoughts of like, I have failed as a parent here, this is a low. And I was
You're
talking to
gonna
my
raise
husband.
a gaming addict for
Yes,
sure.
exactly, like, "What have I done?" And
Yes.
I was talking to my husband, going to sleep that night, and I was, expressing my woes of, being a terrible mom and raising a gaming addict. And he actually gave me the perspective of, "I think our child had the best night of his life." Like, I think of this as some tragedy, and he thinks it's the best thing ever. So, there were obviously downfalls to having a very limited media use in our household.
Yes, I will say from your story, I mean, first off, that drive can be so strong for them, and
Mhm.
again, the easiest way to avoid it is to just not even have it in your house. What I love about this age, because I feel like we still have the freedom to restrict
Right.
everything without having to thoughtfully worry about how am I training you to use this later, right? And I'm glad to know that your child did not turn out to be a gaming addict and is a very
Not yet.
high functioning, responsible adult.
Yeah. What
Actually,
about you? Yeah, I
well,
wanna hear about some of the problems or unexpected things that maybe backfired in your techniques.
okay. So have you ever had weevils in your pantry? Do you know what those
No.
are? They're these like just disgusting bugs that get into flour and rice and grains. And once they come in on like something you could buy from the grocery store. They come in and then they just infiltrate everything in the pantry to the extent that they can eat through the glue of sealed bags and get into the bag so that you can have a bag of rice. It still is completely sealed. There's no rice falling out. And there are weevils on the inside of it. It is
Oh my
so
goodness.
disgusting. At any rate, I kind of feel that way about trying to restrict content in this day of ubiquitous screens. My children at these young ages, if there is an opening anywhere into some kind of content that wasn't necessarily on our list of approved content, they're going to find it. And it's not
Mhm.
even like they're trying to be bad. They're just searching for everything that they have access to. They're going to find any hole in the problem. So, like, the DVD player with no streaming services, that is hack proof. There is no other way around that, right? But for example, my daughter got a karaoke machine for Christmas. Well, one of my children discovered that if you played around with that enough, you could actually get to YouTube through that. And then had hours of endless YouTube viewing without anybody knowing because there was no TV turned on. There was no tablet that he had
Mhm.
access to, but he had found the karaoke machine. Who
Right.
knew? It's like the weevils. I thought the thing was locked, but they're still in there in the bag. I can see them.
Right.
Anyway, I feel like the pitfall with my hack is that you just have to be so incredibly vigorous about it.
I feel like we've definitely begun to tackle another part of this large parenting struggle of screens and what to do with screens and our kids. Let's try to wrap this up and come up with some concluding thoughts, practical advice for parents here.
Okay, so first off, I've said this already in this episode, but I think your method of parenting demonstrates this perfectly, Sylvia, that in this school age child, we're talking about ages 4, 5, up through 5th grade, we have the freedom to not do screens at all if that works at your home. There is no pressure or need developmentally to expose them to screens. They are still going to learn best from their natural environment, building relationships with people in person, right?
Right.
And that's going to all change once they go into middle school and preteen and teen, where now our mission actually has to turn to allowing them to have screens so that we are helping them figure out how to navigate screens for when they become adults and they're doing it entirely on their own. But at these young ages, we still have the freedom to restrict. And you did that in your home, and there are people that do that in their homes, and it's wonderful and works beautifully. For those of you like me who are going to use screens in your home, I've said this too. What do I use screens for at these ages? I use them for me, and they all revolve around my survival, which could at times be that I need sleep. It could at times be that I need my children to be safe while I'm not with them. And it could at times just be for my sanity. Then I would encourage you to be very, very thoughtful about the content that you're feeding those elementary age children and how they're accessing it. And it's really tough. It's like the weevils. It is almost impossible. I know this is an impossible mission. We can't do it perfectly, but at least being mindful about it and trying.
Yeah.
We mentioned earlier the family media plan that the AAP has on their Bright Futures website, which is just kind of a cool tool to plug in each child and their age and your thoughts on screens for them. And I think the whole point of that is that you do need to think about each child individually and what works for them and what works for you as the parent. And I've said this many times too. I think it makes the point that 90% of the battle is having a parent who is mindfully thinking about the screens.
Absolutely. We've just hit the tip of the iceberg here about screens. There are so many topics that we can address in the future. One of them being gaming, what type of video games,
Yes.
how do we allow and choose what they're gaming with? Number two, how to limit time with
Mhm.
screens. We talked about content a lot today, but how do we mitigate time, limit time? What are our tricks and hacks for how much time they should be using screens? And of course, media use in the preteen, media use in the teenager, social media. Screens can be a lot of different topics that we address in future episodes.
Sounds good. We will see you in the future for more about screens.
This is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Sylvia.
And I'm Vivian. Thanks for listening. As always, we welcome your feedback. You can find us at 10kids2docs.com with our Gmail at the bottom to send us feedback.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.